December 18, 2024. Back alley behind Stallone's boxing gym, South Philadelphia. Three shadows moved through the rain like death itself. Marcus the Wolf Chen, Victor Sledge Petrov, Danny Ghost Morales, the most dangerous killers the Pentagon never officially trained. They'd been hunting their former leader for 15 years. Stallone Sylvester stood in the narrow alley, hands empty, back against the brick wall. The same man who'd once taken down entire terrorist cells with nothing but his bare hands. The man they called the Reaper before he vanished. "Hello, boss," Marcus said, raising his Sig Sauer. "Time to come home." What happened in the next 3 minutes would be replayed in classified briefings for decades. Because when you corner a man who taught killers how to kill, you better make sure he's actually trapped. The night Stallone Sylvester reminded the world why legends never die. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the fire escape above like skeletal fingers tapping out a funeral march. Stallone's breath formed small clouds in the December cold as he studied the three men who'd materialized from his past, like nightmares given flesh. Marcus Chen hadn't changed much. Still lean, still predatory, with those dead shark eyes that had earned him his call sign. The wolf had always been the tracker, the one who could hunt a target across continents. His weapon remained steady despite the rain, professional as always. Victor Petrov looked like he'd been hitting the steroids harder than ever. Sledge had always been their heavy hitter, the one they sent when subtlety wasn't required. The massive Russian's scarred face split into a grin that held no warmth, only the promise of violence. Danny Morales moved like smoke against the alley's brick wall, positioning himself to cut off any escape route. Ghost had earned his nickname through an almost supernatural ability to appear and disappear at will. Even now, in the dim light from the street lamp, he seemed to flicker in and out of existence. 15 years. 15 years since Stallone had walked away from the Black Ops unit he'd built from scratch. 15 years since he'd discovered what their handlers at Cerberus Division were really using them for. 15 years of looking over his shoulder, knowing this moment would eventually come. "You boys look good," Stallone said, his voice carrying that same calm authority that had once commanded respect in briefing rooms from Langley to the Pentagon. "Been keeping busy?" "Cut the small talk, boss." Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "Cerberus wants you back in the fold. Dead or alive is their preference, but they'll settle for just dead." Stallone's eyes flicked to the fire escape ladder, calculating distances and angles with the same tactical precision that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless black bag operations. 20 feet to his left, 12 rungs to the first platform. Victor would get 1 shot, maybe 2, before Stallone could reach cover, but that wasn't the play. Not tonight. "Cerberus still running their little puppet show?" Stallone asked, shifting his weight imperceptibly. To anyone else, it would look like nervous fidgeting. His former team knew better. They were watching a master at work, still cleaning up inconvenient witnesses for their political friends. "Politics ain't our concern," Victor rumbled, his Russian accent thick as motor oil. "We follow orders. You taught us that." "I taught you a lot of things, Sledge." Stallone's voice carried a hint of sadness. "Apparently I didn't teach you how to ask the right questions." The rain intensified, turning the alley into a symphony of white noise. Perfect acoustic cover for what was about to happen. "You disappeared." Danny spoke for the first time, his voice barely audible above the downpour. "Left us to clean up your mess in Damascus. Torres died because you weren't there to watch our 6. Pain flashed across Stallone's face. Elena Torres had been their communications specialist, barely 25, with a daughter back in San Antonio. She died 3 days after Stallone walked away from the team, caught in an ambush during an operation he should have been leading. "Torres died because Cerberus fed her bad intelligence," Stallone said, his voice harder now. "Same way they fed us bad intelligence for 2 years. How many innocents did we take out, boys? How many times did we think we were eliminating terrorists, only to find out later they were journalists, whistleblowers, government accountants who'd stumbled onto the wrong financial records?" "Collateral damage," Marcus said, but something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe, or memory. That school teacher in Karachi wasn't collateral damage. Neither was that aid worker in Yemen, or that entire family in... Enough! Victor's roar echoed off the alley walls. You abandoned us. You betrayed everything we stood for. Stallone straightened, and for a moment, the shadows seemed to bend around him. The mild-mannered gym owner disappeared, replaced by something older, harder, infinitely more dangerous. The Reaper had awakened. I never betrayed you, he said softly. But I sure as hell betrayed them. The first shot came from Marcus, just as Stallone had predicted, but by the time the wolf's finger squeezed the trigger, Stallone was already moving. Not toward the fire escape, not toward cover, straight at them. 15 years of running a boxing gym hadn't softened him. If anything, the daily training had kept him sharp, added new techniques to his already lethal repertoire. The rain that should have slowed him down became his ally, masking his footsteps, making him harder to track. The bullet sparked off the brick wall where his head had been a microsecond before. What happened next would become legend among the Black Ops community. The night the Reaper reminded everyone why some ghosts should stay buried. Ready to see why the most dangerous man alive chose to disappear for 15 years? Follow along as we dive into a conspiracy that reaches the very heart of American power and discover what Stallone Sylvester has been planning all this time. Introduction. The first microsecond of combat stretched into eternity as Stallone's body remembered what his mind had tried to forget. Muscle memory overrode 15 years of deliberate suppression, and the Reaper emerged from hibernation like an apex predator awakening from a long winter's sleep. Marcus's second shot went wide as Stallone closed the distance with inhuman speed, his body weaving through the rain-slicked alley with the fluid grace of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of violence. But as his hand reached for Marcus's gun arm, something stopped him cold. Elena. Not the Elena Torres who had died in Damascus, but the other Elena. Elena Vasquez, the woman whose gentle touch had slowly coaxed him back to humanity over the past 8 years. The same hands that had stitched countless cuts on young boxers' faces, that had held his own scarred palms during nightmares about children caught in crossfire, that had trembled when she'd whispered she loved him despite not knowing what monsters lived in his past. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough. Victor's massive fist caught him in the ribs, sending him crashing into a stack of metal garbage cans with a sound like thunder. The impact drove the breath from his lungs and sent pain shooting through his side, but more importantly, it gave him the distance he needed to think. What the hell was he doing? 15 years ago, Stallone Sylvester had been a ghost, a phantom who eliminated problems that couldn't officially exist. He'd been a weapon forged in the crucible of black operations, honed to surgical precision by handlers who valued results over conscience. The Reaper had been perfect because he'd had nothing to lose, no attachments to make him weak, no loved ones to be used as leverage. But that man had died the night he'd walked away from Cerberus Division. The man who'd risen from those ashes had built something worth protecting, something fragile and precious and utterly incompatible with the skills he'd just reflexively employed. Stallone's boxing academy sat 2 blocks from this alley, housed in a converted warehouse that smelled of sweat, hope, and the liniment Elena used to treat injuries. 43 kids trained there, ranging from 8-year-old Maya Rodriguez, who just learned to throw a proper jab, to 18-year-old Jerome Washington, who had a real shot at making the Olympic trials. These weren't rich suburban kids looking for a hobby. They were North Philly survivors who needed the gym the way drowning men needed air. And Elena, God, Elena didn't even know his real name. To her, he was Frank Stallone, the quiet ex-military guy who'd bought a failing gym with what she assumed was inheritance money and had slowly transformed it into something approaching a miracle. She taught 3rd grade at the elementary school 6 blocks away, and twice a week she volunteered at the gym, helping kids with homework before practice and teaching them that someone cared about more than just their ability to throw punches. She thought his scars came from Afghanistan, the official version, where Sergeant Frank Stallone had been a Force Recon Marine who'd done 2 tours before an IED had ended his military career. She didn't know about Karachi, or Damascus, or the 16 other countries where the Reaper had left bodies in his wake. She didn't know that the man she loved had once been capable of killing 12 trained operatives with nothing but a dinner fork and 30 seconds of opportunity. She definitely didn't know about the storage unit in South Jersey, where he'd hidden enough evidence to bring down half the intelligence community, insurance he'd hoped never to need. Getting slow in your old age, boss, Victor laughed, advancing through the rain with Danny flanking wide. Marcus had recovered his position, gun once again trained with professional steadiness. But Stallone was no longer thinking like an operative. He was thinking like a man with everything to lose. The gym would be empty now. He'd locked up himself at 9:30, just before heading out back to dump the trash. Elena would be grading papers in her apartment above the coffee shop on Broad Street, probably with Jazz playing softly and her reading glasses perched on her nose. Tomorrow was Saturday, which meant the kids would arrive early for sparring practice. Jerome had a bout next weekend, and Maya was finally ready to move up from the heavy bag to light contact work. A normal life. A good life. The kind of life the Reaper had never imagined possible. All of it balanced on a knife's edge in this rain-soaked alley. You know what the difference is between then and now? Stallone asked, rising slowly from the scattered garbage cans, pain radiating through his ribs. Rain plastered his graying hair to his skull, and for a moment he looked older than his 58 years. You tell us, Marcus said, but his eyes were wary. Even wounded, even outnumbered, the Reaper commanded respect. 15 years ago I had nothing to lose, Stallone replied. Now I have everything. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment the only sound was rain drumming against fire escapes and distant traffic. Then Danny's radio crackled to life, breaking the silence with a burst of static that made all four men freeze. Ghost Team, this is Control. Package has been compromised. Abort current operation and proceed to secondary location. Repeat, abort, and relocate. Danny's hand moved instinctively toward the radio clipped to his vest, but Marcus's sharp gesture stopped him. The wolf's eyes never left Stallone, but something had changed in his expression, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. Secondary location, Stallone repeated slowly, his voice carrying a note of grim recognition. They're not just cleaning up loose ends, are they? They're cleaning house. Victor's massive frame shifted uncomfortably, rain streaming down his scarred face. What the hell are you talking about? But Stallone could see it now, the pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. You boys never wondered why they sent the whole team after one burned-out gym owner? Why they didn't just send a single shooter, make it look like a robbery gone wrong? The radio crackled again, more insistent this time. Ghost Team, acknowledge. Time is critical. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he made no move to respond to Control's increasingly urgent calls. Danny glanced between his team leader and the radio, confusion evident even in the dim alley lighting. Because you're not here to kill me, Stallone continued, rising to his full height despite the pain in his ribs. You're here to die with me. The truth hit them like a physical blow. Stallone could see it in Victor's widening eyes, in the way Danny's hand froze halfway to his weapon, in the barely perceptible tremor that ran through Marcus's gun arm. 15 years, Stallone said, his voice gaining strength. 15 years you've been following orders, asking no questions, believing you were the good guys. But you know what happened to Torres in Damascus, don't you? What really happened? She walked into an ambush, Danny whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. She walked into my ambush, Stallone corrected. The one Cerberus planned for me. When I disappeared, they needed someone to take my place in that kill box. Elena was just convenient. Victor's fist clenched and unclenched, the sound of knuckles popping audible even over the rain. You're lying. Am I? Then why haven't you answered Control's calls? Why is your secondary location a cemetery in South Jersey where 3 decorated operators are going to tragically die in the line of duty while pursuing a dangerous fugitive? The radio had gone silent, which somehow felt more ominous than the constant chatter. In that silence, Stallone could almost hear the gears turning in his former subordinates' minds, connections being made that they'd been trained not to see. The Kozlov operation in Prague, Marcus said suddenly, his voice flat. You weren't sick. You were supposed to be there. And instead, they sent Ramirez. Stallone nodded grimly. Car bomb took out half a city block. Very messy, very public. Perfect cover for eliminating a sniper who'd started asking questions about civilian casualties. Danny's radio crackled one final time. Ghost Team, Your transponders show you are still at primary location. Be advised, cleanup crew is en route. You have 7 minutes to complete mission and extract. This time, the silence that followed was absolute. Cleanup crew, Victor repeated, the words tasting bitter. They're sending a cleanup crew. For us. Stallone watched the realization spread across their faces like a virus. These men, his men, once upon a time, finally understood what he'd discovered 15 years ago in that blood-soaked apartment in Karachi. They weren't elite operators serving their country's interests. They were loose ends, disposable assets with expiration dates. 7 minutes, Marcus said, lowering his weapon for the first time since the confrontation began. Jesus Christ, 7 minutes! Unless, Stallone said quietly, you're ready to hear what I've really been doing for the past 15 years. The rain seemed to intensify, turning the alley into a curtain of silver that isolated them from the world beyond. 3 killers sent to execute their former leader, only to discover they were marked for death themselves. And in the center of it all, a man who'd given up everything to escape this life, now faced with the choice of watching his former team die or revealing the secret that could destroy them all. The storage unit, Danny breathed, understanding flickering in his eyes. The insurance policy. You've been building a case. Stallone's smile was cold as winter steel. For 15 years, I've been documenting every operation, every target, every order that came down from Cerberus Division. Names, dates, locations, financial records, everything. In the distance, barely audible over the storm, came the sound of approaching vehicles. The cleanup crew had arrived early. The sound of engines cutting through the rain hit them like a death knell. 3 black SUVs, moving with the coordinated precision that only came from tactical training. Stallone felt his chest tighten as the old familiar dread crept up his spine. The same feeling he'd carried for 15 years, always looking over his shoulder, always waiting for this moment. Move, Marcus snapped, but his voice lacked the authority it once carried. The wolf was shaken, his tactical mind racing through scenarios that all ended the same way. There's a drainage tunnel 2 blocks south. No. Stallone's voice cut through the panic like a blade. You run now, they'll hunt you forever. Trust me, I've tried. Victor's scarred face twisted with confusion and rage. So what, we just stand here and die? We trust the man who abandoned us? I never abandoned you, Stallone said, but his words felt hollow even to himself. Because hadn't he? When he'd walked away that night in Karachi, blood on his hands and revelation burning in his chest, hadn't he condemned his team to this fate? Danny's radio erupted with static. Ghost team. Cleanup crew has eyes on target location. Confirm completion of primary objective. The vehicles were closer now. Stallone could make out their tactical formation. Standard assassination sweep pattern, designed to contain and eliminate all witnesses in a 6-block radius. He'd used the same approach in Bucharest, in Bangkok, in a dozen other cities where problems needed permanent solutions. Elena, he whispered, and the name escaped his lips like a prayer. Marcus caught the word, and something shifted in his expression. The woman from the coffee shop, the teacher. Stallone's blood turned to ice. You've been watching her. Standard surveillance protocol, Danny said, but he wouldn't meet Stallone's eyes. We needed leverage points. The rage that surged through Stallone's chest was different from the cold tactical fury of the Reaper. This was personal, protective, the wrath of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. For 15 years, he'd kept Elena separate from this life, created a barrier between the monster he'd been and the man she'd fallen in love with. If you've touched her, she's safe, Marcus said quickly, recognizing the dangerous shift in Stallone's demeanor. For now. But Cerberus doesn't leave loose ends. You know that better than anyone. The truth hit Stallone like a physical blow. It wouldn't matter if they killed him here in this alley. Elena would still be a liability, a connection to Frank Stallone who might know too much, might ask too many questions about his death. The kids at the gym, the neighbors who'd grown fond of the quiet ex-Marine who fixed everything and asked for nothing in return, they'd all become problems requiring solutions. Jesus, Victor breathed, understanding dawning in his eyes. They're not just cleaning up the operation, they're erasing it, all of it. Everyone who ever knew us, Danny added, his voice hollow. Our families, our contacts, anyone who might connect the dots. Stallone's mind raced through possibilities, each one darker than the last. His carefully maintained cover identity would crumble under investigation. The gym's financial records would lead back to offshore accounts. Elena would become a target the moment someone asked why Frank Stallone had really bought that failing boxing academy with cash, no questions asked. The engines were almost on top of them now. Through the rain, Stallone could see tactical flashlight beams sweeping the alley's entrance, systematic and thorough. Professional killers doing what they did best. The storage unit, Marcus said urgently. Your insurance policy. Can it stop this? Stallone's laugh was bitter. You think I built a case for 15 years just to let it sit in a concrete box? I've been feeding information to investigative journalists, congressional staffers, anyone with the platform and the courage to ask hard questions. But it takes time. We don't have time, Victor interrupted. The first tactical team appeared at the alley's mouth, moving with the fluid grace of apex predators. Stallone recognized their formation, their equipment, even their approach pattern. He'd trained these people, or people just like them. The realization was nauseating. There's another way, Stallone said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. Desperate, dangerous, but possible. But you're not going to like it. We're listening, Marcus replied. We give them what they want. We die. Danny stared at him. Come again? Officially, we die tonight, all of us. But first, we disappear in a way that makes Cerberus think the cleanup was successful while buying us time to expose everything. The tactical teams were 50 yards away and closing fast. Whatever they were going to do, it had to happen now. The storm drains connect to the subway tunnels, Stallone continued rapidly. There's a maintenance access 3 blocks east that leads to an abandoned section. If we can make it look like we died in an explosion, boss, Victor said quietly, his eyes fixed on something beyond the approaching teams. Stallone turned and felt his heart stop. Elena Vasquez stood in the coffee shop doorway across the street, searching for something in the rain-soaked darkness. Searching for him. Chapter 5. Time crystallized into razor-sharp fragments. Elena's silhouette in the doorway, backlit by warm coffee shop light. The tactical teams advancing with mechanical precision through sheets of rain. His former operators looking to him for salvation he wasn't sure he could provide. And beneath it all, the crushing weight of 15 years of carefully maintained lies about to collapse like a house of cards. She's looking for you, Marcus observed, his voice carrying a note of professional detachment that made Stallone's skin crawl. Probably wondering why you haven't come home. Home. The word twisted in Stallone's chest like a knife. Elena's apartment above the coffee shop had become his sanctuary, a place where Frank Stallone could exist without shadows, where the smell of her lavender shampoo could chase away nightmares about Damascus and Karachi. Saturday mornings reading the paper together. Sunday dinners that lasted hours because she insisted on cooking elaborate meals for a man she thought had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan on MREs and determination. She had no idea she'd been loving a ghost. You never told her, Danny said, and it wasn't a question. 15 years building a life with someone who doesn't know your real name. The tactical teams had slowed their advance, professional enough to recognize when a situation required finesse over speed. They'd identified Elena as a potential complication, civilian interference that could turn a clean assassination into a public relations nightmare. Stallone could practically see their mental calculations, contain the woman, eliminate the targets, sanitize the scene. Elena stepped further into the rain, her dark hair immediately beginning to plaster against her skull. She was wearing the blue sweater he'd bought her for Christmas, the one she claimed made her feel beautiful even when grading papers at midnight. In the coffee shop behind her, Stallone could see the corner table where they'd shared their first real conversation 8 years ago, where she'd told him about the kids she taught and asked why his eyes always looked so sad. The beautiful thing about lies, Victor said quietly, is how they protect the people we love, until they don't. Stallone's hands clenched into fists. Victor was right. Every lie he'd told Elena had been a shield, protecting her from the toxic truth of what he'd been, what he'd done. Frank Stallone was a carefully constructed fiction designed to keep Elena Vasquez safe from the monsters that hunted the Reaper. But fiction couldn't stop bullets. and love couldn't deflect the attention of a cleanup crew with orders to eliminate all loose ends. "She's going to call out to you," Marcus predicted, watching Elena scan the shadows across the street. "Any second now. And when she does, they'll take her," Stallone finished. The words felt like ash in his mouth. Through the rain, Elena's voice carried with heartbreaking clarity. "Frank, honey, are you out there?" The tactical team leader's hand moved to his radio. "Standard protocol. Identify all civilians in the operational area, assess threat levels, neutralize accordingly." Elena Vasquez, 34 years old, third-grade teacher, volunteer youth counselor, woman who cried during insurance commercials and made the world's worst coffee but somehow perfect pancakes. To them, she was target secondary, a problem requiring permanent solution. "This is my fault," Stallone said, the admission tearing from his chest like shrapnel. "Every person they're going to kill tonight, it's because I was too much of a coward to finish what I started 15 years ago." The truth was spreading through him like poison now, contaminating every memory he'd tried to keep pure. Those 43 kids at the gym, learning discipline and self-respect in a world designed to crush both, they'd become targets because the Reaper had taught them to throw left hooks. Elena's fellow teachers, the parents who trusted the quiet ex-Marine with their children's futures, the neighborhood shop owners who'd watched him transform a failing gym into something approaching a miracle, all of them marked for death because he dared to believe he could escape his past. "Frank!" Elena called again, worry creeping into her voice. She'd spotted something, maybe the tactical team's flashlights, maybe the way shadows moved wrong in the alley. Her teacher's instincts, honed by years of watching for trouble among kids who carried adult burdens, were screaming that something was wrong. Danny's radio crackled, "Control to Ghost Team. Civilian interference confirmed. Authorize expansion to Level 7 protocols." Level 7. Stallone's blood froze as the classification hit him. Total area denial. Eliminate all potential witnesses within a quarter-mile radius. They weren't just planning to kill Elena, they were planning to sanitize the entire neighborhood. Everyone who might ask inconvenient questions about what happened to Frank Stallone and the woman who loved him. The coffee shop held 12 people. The apartment building above it housed 36 residents. Mrs. Chen, who ran the corner grocery. Father Martinez from the church where Elena sometimes dragged him for Sunday service. Jorge the mechanic who'd spent 6 months teaching Jerome Washington that earning respect meant more than winning fights. All about to become casualties in a war Elena didn't even know existed. "I can't," Stallone's voice broke. "I can't watch them kill her because of me." But Marcus was already moving, his weapon trained not on Stallone, but on the approaching tactical team. "Then don't," the wolf said quietly. "Let's go save your girl." The tactical teams closed their formation, weapons ready, as Marcus's radio buzzed with an incoming transmission. But instead of the expected orders, a familiar voice crackled through the static, one that made Stallone's blood turn to ice. "Ghost Team, this is Elena Vasquez." Marcus stared at his radio in confusion. Victor's weapon wavered. Danny took an involuntary step backward. But Stallone felt the world tilt on its axis as 15 years of carefully constructed reality shattered like glass. "That's impossible," Danny whispered. Elena's voice continued, calm and professional through the radio static. "Stallone, I know you can hear me. It's time to come home." The rain seemed to stop, though Stallone knew it was still falling. The woman in the coffee shop doorway, his Elena, his sanctuary, his beautiful lie, was speaking through a Cerberus Division tactical radio on an encrypted frequency that required Level 7 clearance to access. "No," Stallone breathed, but the pieces were already falling into place with sickening clarity. 8 years ago, when they'd met in that coffee shop, she'd been reading a newspaper article about veteran suicide rates, such perfect bait for a broken ex-soldier looking for redemption. Her easy acceptance of his silences, his nightmares, his careful evasions about his past. The way she never pushed too hard, never asked the questions any normal person would ask. "Sir?" Danny's voice came from very far away. "Sir, what's happening?" Through his radio, Elena, or whoever she really was, laughed softly. "Oh, sweetheart, did you really think you could disappear from us? Did you think love was stronger than operational protocol?" Marcus lowered his weapon completely, understanding written across his scarred features. She's been running him. For 8 years, she's been running a long-term asset recovery operation. The tactical teams had stopped their advance, no longer concerned with stealth. They were spectators now, watching their legendary former commander discover that everything he'd believed about his new life was a lie. Stallone could see their faces in the streetlight, some curious, some pitying, all professionally detached. "The gym was our idea," Elena's voice continued through the radio, each word a knife between his ribs. "Give the Reaper something to care about, something to protect. Let him think he was building a life while we documented his every move, his every contact, his every weakness." Stallone's legs gave out, and he found himself on his knees in the rain-soaked alley. The kids. Jerome Washington's proud grin when he'd mastered that difficult combination. Little Maria Santos practicing her footwork with fierce determination. 43 kids who'd looked up to Frank Stallone as something approaching a father figure, never knowing they were props in an 8-year psychological operation. "You son of a bitch," Victor snarled into his radio. "Those are kids, innocent kids." "Nothing's innocent in this business," Elena replied. "You should know that better than anyone, Victor. How many children died in Kandahar because you were too slow with that rifle?" Victor's face went white, but Elena wasn't finished. "And Marcus, still having nightmares about that family in Prague, the ones you eliminated because they saw too much?" Her laugh was crystalline, beautiful, exactly like the woman who'd held Stallone through countless nights of cold sweats and phantom pain. "Such broken toys, all of you, perfect for manipulation." Danny's hands were shaking now. "The coffee shop, the whole neighborhood, it's all—" "A stage set," Elena confirmed. "Mrs. Chen reports to us weekly. Father Martinez has been on payroll for 6 years. Even Jorge the mechanic, especially Jorge. Every conversation, every relationship, every moment of happiness you thought you'd found. We scripted it all." Stallone thought he might vomit. The taste of copper filled his mouth as 8 years of memories rearranged themselves into something monstrous. Elena's gentle touch when nightmares woke him. Her patient questions about his past that never quite crossed the line into suspicion. The way she'd maneuvered him into buying the gym, into opening his heart to those kids, into believing he could be Frank Stallone instead of the Reaper. Why? The words scraped from his throat like broken glass. "Because you were too dangerous to kill and too valuable to lose," Elena's voice replied. "So we gave you a leash made of love and let you think it was freedom." The great Stallone Sylvester, reduced to playing house with a woman who's been filing reports on him twice a week for 8 years. Through the rain, Stallone could see the figure in the coffee shop doorway pull out a phone. Even at this distance, he could make out her smile. The same smile that had greeted him every morning, that had kissed him goodbye every evening, that had whispered promises about their future together. All of it performance. All of it lie. "Did you ever—" Stallone's voice cracked. "Was any of it real?" The pause that followed lasted forever. "You were a job, Frank. A very long, very boring job." The words hit Stallone like physical blows, each syllable driving him deeper into the rain-soaked concrete. 8 years of morning coffee shared in comfortable silence. 8 years of her head on his shoulder during late-night movies. 8 years of believing he'd found something pure in a world built from blood and shadows. All of it theater, all of it orchestrated. "The evidence," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "The storage unit, you know about that too." Elena's laugh through the radio was warm, intimate. The same laugh that had once made him believe in second chances. Unit 247 at Secure Space Storage. 17 bankers' boxes of classified documents, digital files dating back to 2008, recorded confessions from targets who thought they were talking to priests and doctors. "Really, Frank, did you think we weren't monitoring every move you made?" The psychological warfare was masterful, Stallone realized with sick admiration. They weren't just destroying his present, they were obliterating his past, his future, every escape route he'd spent 15 years constructing, the evidence he'd gathered, the insurance policy he'd built to protect himself and expose Cerberus. They'd known about it all along. "Why let me collect it?" he asked. "Why let me think I had leverage?" "Because hope is the most effective leash," Elena replied. "Give a man something to believe in, something to fight for, and he'll police himself. You never tried to disappear completely because you thought you had a nuclear option. You never tried to eliminate us because you thought you could expose us instead. You stayed exactly where we wanted you, contained but functional. Marcus was staring at his radio with something approaching awe. Jesus Christ, it's not a cleanup operation. It's a recruitment briefing. The truth crystallized with horrible clarity. They weren't here to kill him. They were here to bring him back. After 8 years of psychological conditioning, of systematically destroying every human connection that mattered to him, Cerberus was ready to collect their asset, the Reaper, properly broken and rebuilt, ready to serve without question. The kids at the gym, Victor said quietly. They're not in danger. They're leverage. Very good, Elena's voice purred. 43 children who worship their coach Frank, who depend on him for guidance, for stability, for protection. Children who would be devastated if something happened to their beloved mentor. Children whose futures hang in the balance of one very simple decision. Stallone forced himself to his feet, rain streaming down his face like tears he refused to shed. Through the coffee shop window he could see Elena, the woman who wasn't Elena, still holding her phone, still smiling. Behind her, the warm light illuminated the corner table where they'd shared their first kiss, where she'd told him she loved him, where they'd planned a future that had never existed. "What do you want?" he asked. "Come home," she said simply. "Resume your position as lead operative for Cerberus Division. Complete the assignments we give you without question, without conscience, without hope of escape. In exchange, we'll let you keep the illusion. Saturday mornings with your loving girlfriend. Sunday dinners at the gym with your adopted children. All the beautiful lies that make existence bearable. And if I refuse?" The pause stretched like a blade across his throat. "Then we torch it all," Elena said, her voice losing its warmth. "The gym burns with everyone inside. Your precious Elena Vasquez disappears forever, replaced by someone who never knew you, never loved you, never existed. The kids scattered to group homes and juvenile facilities. Mrs. Chen's grocery gets robbed by gang members who don't leave witnesses. Father Martinez suffers a tragic accident during evening prayers. The tactical teams had formed a loose perimeter around the alley now, weapons lowered but ready. They weren't here for a firefight, they were here for a surrender. Stallone could see it in their posture, their positioning. They knew he was beaten. They knew 8 years of careful psychological architecture had finally achieved its purpose. "You're asking me to become the Reaper again," Stallone said. "I'm asking you to stop pretending you ever stopped," Elena replied. "You think training those kids is different from training soldiers? You think building their discipline, their fighting instincts, their willingness to hurt others, you think that's salvation? You've been doing our work all along, Frank, creating the next generation of weapons." The words hit home with devastating precision. Jerome Washington's cold fury when he fought, channeled into perfect technique. Maria Santos's ruthless determination to win at any cost. 43 kids learning that violence, properly applied, solved problems that words couldn't touch. Had he been saving them, or had he been molding them into something else entirely? "Decide," Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "But decide quickly. The rain's getting heavy, and I'd hate for something terrible to happen while you're thinking things over." Stallone looked at his former operators, saw his own desperation reflected in their faces. Then he looked toward the coffee shop, toward the woman who'd never existed, toward the life that had been nothing but an elaborate cage. The point of no return stretched before him like a chasm. The silence stretched for 10 heartbeats, 20, 30. Rain drummed against metal fire escapes and pooled in broken concrete, the only sound in a world holding its breath. Then Stallone began to laugh. It started as a whisper of sound, barely audible over the storm. But it grew, building from his chest like something clawing its way out of a grave. His former operators exchanged glances. This wasn't the broken laughter of a shattered man. This was something else entirely. 8 years, Stallone said, his voice carrying a terrible calm. 8 years of psychological manipulation, of manufactured love, of scripted conversations and calculated intimacy. He looked up at the tactical teams, rain streaming down his face. "Do you know what your masters never understood about me? Elena's voice crackled through the radio, losing its confident edge. "Frank, you need to—" They never understood that I knew. The words dropped into the alley like stones into still water. Marcus's weapon wavered. Victor took a step backward. Danny's face went white as comprehension began to dawn. "Not everything," Stallone continued, standing now with the deadly grace that had once made him legend. "I didn't know about Elena. That particular knife caught me clean. But the storage unit, the surveillance, the fact that I was being monitored every second of every day?" His smile was winter itself. "Did you really think a man doesn't notice when shadows follow too precisely, when conversations end too abruptly, when life becomes just a little too convenient?" Through the radio static, Elena's voice had lost all its warmth. "That's impossible. Our psychological profiles indicated—" "Your psychological profiles were built on incomplete data," Stallone interrupted, "because you never understood the one thing that made me different from other operators. I didn't break in Kandahar. I didn't shatter in Prague. I didn't lose my mind in any of the dozen hellholes you sent me to." He paused, letting the truth settle like poison in their ears. "I learned to compartmentalize, to split myself into pieces and hide the important parts where you could never reach them." The tactical team leader spoke into his radio. "Control, we may have a problem here." "No," Stallone said quietly. "You definitely have a problem. Because while you were congratulating yourselves on running the perfect long-term psychological operation, I was running one of my own." He reached into his jacket, slowly, carefully, letting them see the movement. What he withdrew wasn't a weapon. It was a small digital device, its screen glowing softly in the rain-soaked darkness. "Dead Man's Switch," he explained conversationally. "Linked to data caches in 47 countries. Every Cerberus operation since 2003. Every target eliminated. Every civilian casualty, every cover-up, every politician bought, every journalist silenced." His thumb hovered over the activation button. "Elena, sweetheart, are you still listening?" The radio crackled with desperate voices, operational channels overlapping in chaos. "You're bluffing," Elena's voice finally emerged from the static. But there was uncertainty now, fear creeping in at the edges. "Am I?" Stallone asked. "Did your psychological profiles account for the possibility that a man might love a woman, really love her, while knowing she was lying to him? Did they consider that he might treasure every false smile, every manufactured moment of tenderness precisely because he understood their true cost?" Marcus lowered his weapon completely. "Sir, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I loved her anyway," Stallone replied, his voice breaking just slightly, even knowing it was performance, even knowing she was filing reports on every kiss, every nightmare, every moment of vulnerability, because love isn't about truth, gentlemen. Love is about choice, and I chose to love the woman she pretended to be, because that woman, even if she never existed, was worth loving. The tactical teams were receiving new orders now, their leader's face grim as he processed updated instructions through his earpiece. "But Elena made one critical error in her 8-year performance," Stallone continued. "She made that fictional woman too perfect, too pure, too good for a man like me. And that woman, the one who never existed, would never forgive me if I let Cerberus continue destroying innocent lives." His thumb moved fractionally closer to the button. "So here's my counteroffer," he said, his voice carrying the absolute authority that had once commanded the most dangerous men on Earth. "You have 60 seconds to withdraw all assets from this neighborhood, to close the surveillance operation, to transfer those 43 kids to legitimate programs with real counselors who will help them heal instead of weaponizing their pain." He paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Or I press this button and every newspaper in the world gets a very detailed education about what their governments do in the shadows." Elena's voice came through the radio one last time, stripped of all pretense. "You're destroying everything you claim to love." "No," Stallone replied. "I'm finally choosing to save it." The rain continued to fall, washing blood and lies and 8 years of beautiful deception into the gutters where they belonged. The Dead Man's Switch felt warm against Stallone's thumb as 60 seconds became 40, then 20, then 10. Around him, Tactical teams received frantic orders through crackling radios, withdrawal protocols, abort codes, damage control measures that would echo through government corridors for decades to come. At 0, he didn't press the button. Instead, he watched Elena, the woman who had never been Elena, step out of the coffee shop and walk away into the rain-soaked Philadelphia night. She didn't look back, professional to the end, even in defeat. The tactical teams melted into shadows like they had never existed. Marcus, Victor, and Danny lingered longest, their faces reflecting something between respect and sorrow before they too vanished into the darkness that had spawned them all. Stallone stood alone in the alley where it had all begun, listening to the rain wash 15 years of running down storm drains that led nowhere good. 3 months later, the new boxing gym occupied a converted warehouse in South Philly, far from coffee shops that served as surveillance posts and apartments that had been stages in someone else's play. The morning light streaming through tall windows was honest light. No hidden cameras, no manufactured moments, no beautiful lies dressed up as love. 43 kids had become 37. Some had been claimed by family members who suddenly emerged from bureaucratic shadows. Others had chosen different paths when presented with real options instead of carefully orchestrated futures. The ones who remained came because they wanted to be there, not because social workers with hidden agendas had guided them toward predetermined destinations. Jerome Washington was wrapping his hands with the methodical precision Stallone had taught him, but there was something different in the boy's movements now. Purpose where there had once been desperate fury, direction where there had been only rage. "Coach," Jerome said without looking up from his wraps, "you ever regret it?" Stallone finished adjusting the heavy bag that would bear the brunt of the morning's training. "Regret what?" "Choosing the truth over the lie. Everyone knows you loved her." It was remarkable how much 18-year-olds could understand when they weren't being systematically manipulated, how quickly they pieced together fragments of overheard conversations and unexplained disappearances when the adults finally stopped lying to them. "Love isn't something you regret," Stallone said finally, "even when it's complicated. But she wasn't real." Stallone considered this as other kids filtered into the gym, Maria Santos with her fierce determination intact but redirected toward college prep courses, Tommy Chen working on defensive combinations that would serve him well in pre-med studies, others finding their own paths forward. "The woman I loved was real," he said. "She just lived inside someone else's performance. That doesn't make the love false, it makes it tragic. There's a difference." Jerome nodded with the solemnity of youth trying to comprehend adult complexity. "The nightmares stopped though, right? Since you chose truth?" Stallone paused in his equipment check. The nightmares had changed, certainly. Instead of faceless enemies in desert landscapes, he now dreamed of quiet mornings that had never existed and gentle conversations that had been filed away in intelligence reports. Instead of violence, he dreamed of tenderness that had been manufactured in government laboratories and deployed with surgical precision. Which was worse? He couldn't say. "They're different now," he admitted. The morning training session proceeded with familiar rhythms. Combinations practiced until they became muscle memory. Footwork drilled until it flowed like water. Discipline built through repetition and sweat. But underneath the routine, something fundamental had shifted. These kids weren't being shaped into weapons. They were learning to shape themselves into whatever they chose to become. At noon, when the last student had left for school and the gym fell quiet, Stallone found himself alone with the heavy bag and the honest light. He thought about Elena, not the intelligence operative who had manipulated him for 8 years, but the fictional woman who had never existed outside of carefully crafted moments. The woman who had brought him coffee in the mornings and listened to his nightmares with infinite patience. The woman who had whispered that she loved him while mentally composing reports for handlers who viewed human emotion as just another tool for manipulation. That woman deserved to be mourned, even if she had never drawn breath. The dead man's switch sat in a safety deposit box across town, its data caches dormant but ready, insurance against a world that would never stop trying to turn good men into weapons. But Stallone no longer carried it with him. Some burdens were too heavy for daily wear. Outside, Philadelphia moved through its rhythms of honest struggle and genuine hope. Inside the gym, the heavy bag waited for fists that would strike not from rage or manipulation, but from the simple human need to build something better than what came before. The rain had stopped falling weeks ago, but Stallone could still hear it sometimes, washing away 8 years of beautiful deception and leaving behind something harder but more real. Truth, it turned out, was a poor substitute for love, but it was enough to build a life on.